Good Tuesday to you, everybody in Gov 603. Welcome to week boom 2. How's everybody doing? You hanging in there? One week down and 15 to go. Let's get things started in the correct way as we usually do. Delicious little coffee here this morning. All right, I am back. Jeff Gardner, your now sufficiently caffeinated instructor, here with your weekly video. How's everybody doing? Did you get a rest over the weekend? You know, a little after that first week coming back after the long Christmas break. Okay. First things first, thank you so much for everybody who took the week 1 participation quiz. I think we only had one person not take it, which is really, really good. And I sent an email out. If I didn't, I will. But make when I mean, this is now really it had always been standard practice, but they're pushing it more thoroughly at Regent. And I think I explained this in the other video because of some federal requirements, and they want to know who's in and nobody's gaming the system, and all of that stuff. Just by the way, somebody asked me in an email, I think it was last semester, hey, Dr. Gardner, what's are you okay? They were concerned. They weren't like, busting my chops. What's going on with your hands? You see here. To allay any concerns that you might have, I do a lot of backpacking, sort of deep wilderness, long distance trekking, and we went on a long backpack trip this summer. We did 110 miles across the top of a mountain range on the border with Utah and Wyoming. It was a fabulous trip. We were out for 11 days and did 110 miles, did a mountain pass a day. So, up and down and up and down. But about 30 miles into that hike, I got burned quite badly on both of my hands. Now, happily, things have healed quite nicely, actually. So this is just some scarring and some, weird pigmentation. The burn was bad enough. Hiking 70, 80 miles with burnt hands. Don't recommend it. Okay. All right. Week 1 quiz. Thank you very much. Couple of things to give you a heads up on. Your first assignment, beyond your weekly stuff, is now up in the assignment folder. If you go over to Blackboard and over on the left, it'll say assignments right towards the top. You will find the instructional sheet for your research design project. Please click on this, download it, read it carefully. All right, as it mentions in the syllabus, in this class, you're asked to do a research design project. Now, understand that a research design project is not the same as an actual study. All right, you are not being asked to carry out a quantitative survey. And in fact, I've got to make this point very clear right from the onset. If part of your research design project the actual study would include live people, as most surveys do, don't actually do it. If you're going to survey live people and you're a student at Regent, you have to have National Institutes of Health, NIH, human subject research authorization. And if you don't, and you go and carry out a human subject research project, even if it's just a survey, the university can get into a lot of trouble because you are working underneath the university's authority. Now, if you want to go stand on the street corner on your own time and survey people about political opinions or whatever, knock yourself out. But in the capacity of a student, excuse me, you can't do that. Okay, so what a research design project does, it's much like you design the research to say, if I were going to do the research project, this is what I would do. And these are the things that I would employ. And this is the survey instrument that I would use. But you don't actually put it into place. Does that make sense? Or is that understandable? All right, we'll go over to the assignments folder, download the instructional sheet, read it carefully because we're going to do this research design project in 2 parts. All right, and this sheet is for part 1. I'll put up part 2 in a little bit, but I want you to focus for right now on part 1. Okay, so part 1 revolves around getting the idea sort of down on paper. So the first part of part 1 is putting down your research design idea in a discussion link for this week, week 2, over on Blackboard. So create a new thread. Say, I want to design a research project that would look at your choice, and then comment and give feedback on each other's stuff. Okay, so when I say a project of your choice, you might be saying, okay, like what? In the sheet, I give you some examples. All right. You can design a research project to say, evaluate the effectiveness of a policy, whether it's municipal, it's very local, it's city, it's state, it's federal. Okay, so you could say, I'm going to survey people to find out how they feel concerning the requirement of certain trash containers for sanitation purposes, and that the city won't pick up trash unless it's in this special container. And I live in a city like that, and the policy is an absolute failure. The idea was to reduce the amount of material going into the landfill because the city doesn't own a lot of land, and the more stuff that goes into the landfill, the bigger problem that is for the city. Okay, well, what happened inadvertently is they said, all right, you can only put trash out in these bags that are marked, city bags, and they're these the black plastic bags. Okay. People are like, oh, hey, what? Black plastic bag, anything in the bag the city picks up and throws in the dump, right? So people started throwing things into the black plastic bag that the city would normally not allow in the landfill. With good reason, like paint, electronics, old car batteries. so while the volume of the trash went down, the hazardous material in the trash went up. So, okay, so let's say if you want to say, let's test a municipal policy to see if it's a success. What would you do? What kind of a survey would you run? Who would you talk to? Why? All right, that's one topic. You could design a project that seeks to take the measure of employee attitude, say at a federal or state agency. Because remember, we're in government here, so let's keep it political. You could take a political opinion survey about a candidate, about a legislative initiative, about a political party. It's up to you. All right, as I explained, excuse me, in the instructional sheet, the benefit of being a researcher is you get to study anything you want. But that's the burden. You must make that study relevant to your peers within the academy, that is among political scientists, and then the public at large. All right. So the opportunity is at the same time the obligation. So come up with your topic, list it in the discussion board link over in week 2. I'll give you some feedback. Yes, I have to approve the topic. All right. And then away you go. Secondly, what I want you to do for part 1, after you post your topic, excuse me so much, is I need you to write it up. And there are 3 parts to part 1 that I want you to have. I want you to have an introduction in which you very clearly lay out what it is you're going to do. And oh, by the way, this is finished work. Do not send me draft pages. Maybe it's the coffee. All right, this is finished work. So number 1, you need an introduction explaining what does this research design project focus on. Number 2, you need a literature review in which you focus on the sources that are the building blocks for your discussion. So for instance, if you were doing the example that I gave of the policy, municipal policy of you must use this kind of trash bag before, If you want us to pick up your trash, okay. What cities out there have done that? Or is there anything in the literature? What problems have policies like that solved? Is there any studies that have been done? What problems do policies like that create? Have there been any studies done? Like I said, in the case of my town, the problem that created, and they're discontinuing the policy, by the way, the problem that created was people were using the bags to put hazardous materials out on the, and on the curb. And the sanitation guys, they're not like looking in the bag going, oh, and these were materials that not only do not belong in the landfill, but within municipal policy, you had to pay for proper disposal because you don't want to pour paint or battery acid into the water supply. Yeah. Well, so the city lost revenue because people were no longer paying the city for proper disposal, and it began to incur a problem of toxic waste in the landfill. Has that happened anywhere else? Have there been any studies? Has anybody written about it? All right, that should go into your literature review, and so on and so forth. As I point out in the instruction sheet, if you do not know the difference between a literature review and, say, an annotated bibliography, or if you're really not sure what a literature review is, and that's okay, that's why we're here to learn. I'll give you a link to an online resource that will explain it to you. There are lots out there on the the World Wide Web, but make sure you know what that is, okay? And then number 3, the third part of part 1 that you need to write up is your methodology. You need to clearly state, if you were going to, if somebody said, yeah, go do the research, and they said, here's a pile of money, go do the research, what would you do? How would you conduct this? If you're going to conduct a survey, you'll need to say, I'm going to do this by survey, and for part 2, I'm going to ask that you produce the survey. What would be the survey if you were going to do this by way of survey? And since this is a quantitative methods class, some of you, that's a logical way to go about this. That is a survey. Okay? If you have any questions about what to do for part 1, email me. The way I do the papers in classes that I teach is I always split them into 2. All right? I have the first part due early on, and then I give you feedback as to how well, in terms of a baseline, how well you do as a researcher. How well do you do organizing a paper? How well do you do as a writer? This is especially the how well do you do as a writer is of tremendous importance. This first bit, which is not the whole bit, all right, is worth 100 points. It's due February 24th. I will turn it around as grade it and give it back to you really, really quickly. But I will grade it thoroughly and with considerable detail. Now, I'm not the editor of your paper. I'm not going to be reading through and telling you every typo that you have. What I do when I grade these is I look for patterns. And so if one of your patterns is typographical errors, and we make mistakes, okay? Nobody's getting hit on the head like, Bunny Frou-Frou or something. This is a learning experience. So if one of your patterns is typographical errors, I'll tell you that. Say, hey, this paper has a lot of typographical errors or spelling or grammatical errors. I'm sticking with issues for writing. You are then responsible for cleaning that up in part 1 and then making sure that you have it cleaned out of part 2 before you hand in part 2. Now, we're not doing 2 papers. We're doing 1 paper, but we're splitting it in half. I get to give you feedback on how you're doing before the end of the semester. And here's the deal, all right? If you make the changes that I recommend, let's just say, I'm just making this up. Let's say that you get 75 out of 100. And you look at that and you go, yikes. All right, and again, with great specificity, I will tell you why the paper's been given the grade that it's given. Let's say that you get 75 out of 100. When you complete the research design project paper, and the second part is worth 300 points. If you make the changes that I point out in the first part, and then they don't occur again in the second part. And by the way, when I say make the changes, you don't have to rewrite part 1. I'm talking about what you do in part 2. All right. If those issues do not appear in part 2, and part 1 is going to be part of the whole paper, so you fix the changes when you write the whole paper. So I guess in that respect you are redoing it, but I don't want you to redo part 1 and then turn it in as its own independent thing. It becomes the first half of the whole paper. So clean up what you did in part 1 and then don't do that in part 2. And if your grade goes up, and I'm talking percentage, I'll go back and change the grade on the first part. So let's say you got a 75 out of 100 on the first part, 75%. Okay. And then let's say on the second part, the total is 400 points. Let's say that you got 87%. I'll go back and change part 1 to 87 from 75. So it's a win-win. And the idea here is to give you information that's valuable by way of your development as a researcher and a writer. Okay? So, I mean, writing and learning to write and research well is a rigorous process, and that's just the way it is. So, but don't worry, because I'm here to help. Okay? All right. And then I'll post part 2, in about a week or so, because I really want you focusing on part 1. Okay? Discussion boards. Please, please, please note in the syllabus that you must participate in discussion. Could you pass the class without participating in discussion? Probably not. I mean, you could pass it, but you'll end up on academic probation because your grade will end up that low. I just took a quick look at last week, the discussion board, and only 44% of the class fully participated. All right. You need at least 16 posts a week that is answering the 4 questions and then responding to 3 of your classmates. 3 times 4 is 12, plus your original 4 is 16. Right? Only 44% of you had 16 posts or more. That leaves the majority of you who did not have the required numbers. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I will allow you to go back and finish a forum if it's not more than a week gone. I'll put this in an announcement as well. If it's not more than a week gone from the forum. So what do I mean by that? So last week's forum, all right, the one that that is forum number 1, all right, that's done. Only 44% of the people participated in it. All right. It was due January 14th. I will allow participation in points up till the end of this one, that is week 2, which is due January 21st. After that, point-wise, the forum is closed. All right, because you've got to keep up. You've got to keep up on the readings, because that's the core of the class. All right, and come on, be good to your fellow classmates. I mean, with only 44% of you participating fully, that means that like 66%, or it's 56% of the people didn't participate fully, and that reduces the number of people that your other classmates can respond to. So you're putting yourself in a jam, and you're putting them in a jam. Let's not do that. That's not why we're here in this class. That's not why we are here at Regent. Okay? So, as clearly spelled out in the syllabus, if you're not reading and answering and doing the discussion boards on the time, the deadline that they're set, that's late work. And unless you make arrangements with me, there's no requirement to accept late work. And I hate to be the heavy, but I've seen people get in trouble in terms of the tests, in terms of their grades, and then it ends up at the end of the semester, and they're like, "Whoa, hey, wait a minute, what? C minus, D plus? I mean, for a total grade, Yeah, I know. Let's nip that in the bud right now at the beginning of the semester, okay? All right, everybody, and I love you. Okay, let's take a look at last week's questions and the readings, and see what some of you were up to, see what we can add to it. All right, So last week and this week too, we're going to be building a glossary of defined terms and concepts that are central to quantitative research methods. So, if you're reading through this and you're sort of like, oh, okay, what are we, what's the point? What are we doing here? That's the point. That's what we're doing here. Okay, so question number 1. Define the following terms: recreational research, empirical research, applied research. In defining each, be sure to cite an example from the text. Okay, Rebecca, let's take you. I like what you're up to here. You say recreational research is, you wrote this fine, I'm stumbling, is completed simply to satisfy the curiosity of the researcher. Yeah. For example, a political scientist, you write, who may seek to understand the decisions that voters make in order to comprehend the power that voters command over elected officials. The person's just sort of wondering about, I'm just kind of curious myself. And it's really not done in accordance with the core elements of empirical research. So it's almost, think of it like talking to your friends and getting their opinion. That fits the definition of recreational research. Okay. Empirical research, again, back to you, Rebecca, requires a clearly stated hypothesis which can be evaluated objectively. Okay. And then applied research is conducted in order to obtain information that has an immediate real-life application. Some research projects seek to understand what happened in the past. Those can have, real-life applications. Now, applied research, it's not strictly, but it's generally loosely understood as research that is looking at current phenomenon and things that are moving forward. So if you want to know, who really, what the public thought in 1960, I don't know, pick a date, 5, as to who really shot Kennedy, that's not applied research. Okay. Let me go back to empirical research here very quickly. All right. Because Rebecca, you put your finger on something extremely important. That is, empirical research requires a clearly stated hypothesis. Okay. We're going to encounter this word hypothesis, a lot in this class. And in fact, for your research design project, you should, probably have a hypothesis in your methodology section. And to do that, you should probably know what a hypothesis is. Okay, so I'm going to give you the straightforward stripped down definition, then explain it just a teeny bit. All right, a hypothesis is a statement. All right, you're making a statement. Now, you're not asking a question. All right, that's not the purpose of a hypothesis. Hypothesis is a statement about the relationship between two variables. Now, there's some hypotheses that have more than 2, but it's best to keep it to 2. If you have more than 2 variables, formulate another hypothesis. Hypothesis is a statement about 2 variables that makes that's the first part, that makes a prediction and has a direction. Okay, let's break that down. When we say variables, what do we mean? Well, in statistical research, variable means any occurrence. It could mean, a variable could mean how strong a pot of coffee is from one pot to another, or how I feel about coffee when I drink it. Okay, any occurrence, whether it's factual, emotional, a trend, an action, that's a variable. All right, so a hypothesis makes a statement about 2 variables. So, for instance, I could say the 2 variables here, one variable is the cup, and the other one is the coffee. Or it could be one variable is the coffee, and the other one is my teeth. Okay? Those are variables. So that's the first required element of a hypothesis. It concerns the relation, or some sort of a relationship between 2 variables. Number 2, in terms of an element of a hypothesis, it makes a prediction, or I should say, you as a researcher makes a prediction. So, for instance, variable number 1, coffee. Variable number 2, my teeth. Prediction: the staining of teeth is positively correlated to the drinking of coffee. Now, to break that down out of researcher speak, the prediction I'm making is the more coffee someone drinks, the more stained their teeth become. That's a prediction between two variables. And this prediction, element number 3, has a direction. What do we mean by that? Here's what we mean. Coffee stains, drinking more coffee stains teeth. Not people with stained teeth drink more coffee. That would be going the other way. All right. Now you might be saying, okay, that's pretty stupid because someone who has stained teeth doesn't necessarily drink more of one thing or another. Okay. Let's say it's not coffee. Let's say it's, I don't know, why not? It's heroin. Okay. So the two variables are the drug and the user. The prediction is the more someone uses heroin, the more they become addicted. The direction, and that is the direction, not the more they use heroin, the more they're addicted to drugs. That's the direction. Not the more someone is addicted to drugs, the more they use heroin. Right now, that could very well be. But in the hypothesis that we just put together, the direction goes one way. Right now, there are, concerning that topic in general, there are hypotheses that have been tested by research that looks at people who become addicted to one substance, alcohol, marijuana, then develop a tendency to get involved with other substances, so-called gateway drugs. So that's a prediction. And, you would have a hypothesis that runs in the other direction. Addiction leading to the use of drug, not the drug leading to addiction. Do you understand? So it has a definitive direction. What direction? That's up to you to choose as the researcher. And you ask questions. When you're thinking about your research design project, the one of the easiest ways to go about these things and to be good to yourself as a researcher, sit down and write a hypothesis. Okay, so for instance, to use the example that I gave you of my town and the trash bags. All right. Here could be a hypothesis. You'll have two variables, it'll make a prediction, it has a direction. All right. The more that a city requires specific garbage bags for pickup, the more that residents will use those bags to disguise hazardous waste that go into a landfill. That's my hypothesis. Then I would go out and test it because maybe it's not true. Now, here's the great thing about hypotheses. You don't have to prove them. That's not your job as a researcher. Your job as a researcher is just to test them. And if the answer is yes, the answer is yes. If the answer is no, the answer is no. When the answer is no in research, we call that supporting the null hypothesis. When the answer is yes, we call that supporting the hypothesis. So back to the drug example. Say the more someone uses heroin, the more addicted they are to drugs. All right? Or the more someone uses a gateway drug like marijuana, the more likely they are to use heroin. Okay? So let's say we tested that hypothesis. The more that someone uses marijuana, the more likely they are to use heroin. If we found that out to be the case through research, we would say the hypothesis is supported. If we found that that wasn't the case through our research, we would say the null hypothesis is supported. Think about it and saying, like this. The more someone uses marijuana, the more likely they are to use heroin not. Okay? Like that. That's the null hypothesis. All right? So that's the great thing about a hypothesis. It's not your job to try to prove it. It's just your job to test it. When you write as a researcher, be an investigator, not an advocator. I realize that we're all passionate, and I encourage it about what it is you're interested in, because that's why you're here at Regent and in this class. You're interested in certain things? Absolutely. But be an objective researcher, not a biased advocator. Okay? Very, very important. All right. Lastly, for this question, Richard, no. Recreational research is defined as research that involves individual leisure or recreation, such as swimming, biking, hiking, and other outdoor activities. Let's test the, how about the, if this were a hypothesis? Recreational research is defined as research that involves individual leisure or recreation, such as swimming, biking, hiking, and other outdoor activities. Not. The null hypothesis is supported here. No, Richard, that's not recreational research. Okay. Question number 2. Using the World Wide Web resources, identify the following graphs used in Chapter 1, et cetera, et cetera. Scatter plot graph, bar graph, line graph. Okay, again, here we're getting our head around some standard terms. I'm not going to pull your answers on this because this was self-evident. I will say, though, that each of these graphs have their own purposes. So when putting together your research design project, you might say, I would present my data with using the following type of graph. Well, you'd want to select the more appropriate graph for your type of data. So what is that? Well, scatter plots, data graphs, these are good for expressing clusters. That is where instances happen, and especially when you're dealing with continuous data. All right, we'll talk about the types of data as we go along in this class, okay? But you can look that up in the World Wide Web. Scatter plot's good for that, okay? Data clusters of continuous data. Bar graphs, they're good for comparing groups of categorical data, like number of men versus number of women. Amount of popsicles eaten as opposed to ice cream cones or whatever. That's categorical data. Bar graphs are good for that, and line graphs are good for data in which you want to express trends or changes. The amount of ice cream cones eaten as the temperature goes up, because you have the y and the x axis, so you can have temperature here and you can have number of ice cream cones here, and check the line graphs are good for that. Okay, and I'm assuming that some of this is stuff you already know, but we don't assume. All right, question number 3. What are the main elements of the empirical research process? List and briefly explain them. Tiffany, I think you went first for this question, so let's take you first. And you got them all correct. Verification, falsifiability, normative knowledge, non-normative knowledge, transmissible or transmissibility, and cumulative. Okay. Some of the biggies here, the more important elements: verification, that is the acceptance or rejection of a statement regarding something known, which must be supported by evidence. Okay. Falsifiability, rejection of a statement or hypothesis considering conflict, or you should say considered conflicting of empirical evidence. Normative knowledge that is evaluated and value laden. What ought to be non-normative knowledge, factual or objective determinations that are not focused on evaluations, or likewise on emotion. Transmissible, methods used in scientific discovery that others can analyze and replicate the findings. All right, we'll talk about that one a lot, especially when we're talking about external validity, but we'll get to that later. Okay. Cumulative, study builds on a substantive finding and research techniques. And then the last two, which you also got, explanatory and parsimony, a conclusion that can be reached to answer the why and how questions when considered when something occurs, keeping explanations simple, or among explanations equal degrees of confirmation. Okay, good. Just folks, make sure that you know and you can define those terms, but most importantly, make sure that you understand them. If you don't, you're like, I'm reading this thing and I really don't get this normative knowledge stuff, send me an email. I will help you out. All right. Question number 4. What are the assumptions of the empirical research process? Of these assumptions, which in your opinion is most likely to invalidate the results of a research project? Okay. Timothy, I like what you're doing here. Let's take a look. Okay. Let's see. Did you actually list which one you thought would most invalidate a research project? I'm trying to see if if you did, please pardon me because I don't see it right away. All right. Realism. you give the A through G, which is great. Realism, there's a real world that exists independently of our observations. Materialism, only concrete and observable. Denial of the supernatural causes. Explanation of phenomenon based on mysterious, unknown, unobservable, hidden forces are unacceptable. Regulatory natural phenomenon, human and institutional, exhibit regular patterns that can be revealed by reason and observation. That's one of the observations you can make about life. It's an existence. What I mean, I don't mean life. Like what's my purpose? I mean existence. Our time here on the material plane. It's almost boringly predictable. I mean, I'm gonna assure you. I was gonna say bet that as I make this video, a rabbit is not going to appear right here and then suddenly disappear. We live in a world in which the major forces repeat over and over and over, and they are observable by all of us. Okay, regulatory natural phenomenon. Okay, verification, falsification. Statements about the world must be verified or falsified by experience or data, and not personal experience. Data experience. Irrelevance or preference. To a maximum extent, one's values and biases should not affect the decision or reject or accept an empirical claim. Be a researcher, an investigator, not an advocator. Theory and causal explanation. Science aims to create general, verified, explanatory theories. So, the next time you run across a source that's pitching some sort of new identity, run it through each of these and see how well it holds up. Okay? Good principles. So make sure that you understand them, that is, you can define them, and that you know what the definition means. Okay, so for this class, look, you can teach a parrot how to memorize and then repeat something, hence the phrase parroting back. That's not what we're up to. Right? What we're up to here in this class is that you're absorbing this and you can process it. That is, you not only just can you define it, but you understand what the meaning is. So if I asked you to say, well, apply the process of, I'm going to give you a statement here. Can this statement be fit into the category of external validity? And you can look at it and go, well, what do I know about external validity? We haven't learned that yet, so don't worry about it. But I know that it means that by definition it is this, but I know, but by larger meaning, I'm sorry, something flickered in my video. I didn't mean to just sort of stare off into space mysteriously. I know by meaning it means this, and therefore, yes, this statement can be fit into the category of external validity, or no, it cannot. Things like this. All right. Keep up on these terms, the definitions and the meaning. You may see them again, like say on an examination, a wink. All right. And they form the core of your knowledge as a researcher in this class. And then beyond, whatever you want to do, wherever you want to take it. Okay, everybody. Thank you so very much for your attention. All right. Remember, you've got to stay up on the readings and the discussion boards. Really, really important for this class. If you have any questions about the material, about the research design project, please email me. I have office hours right on the syllabus. I'm there all the time. If I don't pick up the phone during my office hours, that means I'm on the phone with somebody else. Text me. Say, hey, this is so-and-so from Gov 603, and I got a question, and I will call you back. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. God bless you, and I will see you on Blackboard. Bye-bye.